to welcome everybody for joining us here today. My name is Martha Brooks, and I am a very new member of the RMI board and very honored to be here facilitating this conversation today with these great experts. Just a bit about myself and why I joined the RMI board. My entire career has been in hard-to-abate sectors, first in operating management and now serving on several different boards. I know firsthand how impactful a courageous corporate decision can be on our environment and have seen some really wonderful examples of great things done by corporations. Over the past 15 years, I've also worked in the fight to overcome poverty in the developing world with CARE, and also in the US with several organizations. And so to come to an organization like RMI fits perfectly with what I want to do for the rest of my life. I am delighted to support RMI's global team as they educate, drive change, and connect powerful players to innovation, measurement systems, and resources, all the while keeping an eye on the impact of everyday people and really keeping that front of mind, which is a lot of what today's conversation will be about. So, formal welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar as we work to live our mission to transform the global energy system to a secure, clean, prosperous, and zero carbon future for all. We are very grateful to our supporters and partners for your investment and commitment to do this work together. And a special thank you to our Solutions Council and Innovators Circle funders. We have many of you on the call today, and your support makes RMI's work possible, including much of what you'll hear about today. And we are especially especially pleased to welcome our attendees, which at the last count includes people from 33 countries and 38 states, an amazing turnout. So joining us today, if we could just have the photos up, are three of our excellent leaders around the world. Habiba Daggash, our Senior Associate for the Global South, is joining us from our Africa Energy Program. Whitney Mann from our Climate Aligned Finance team, and Paula Valencia from our Southeast Asia team. So I am really looking forward to talking with these three brilliant women and learning a little bit more about the work we're doing around the world. After our discussion, we'll have 20 minutes for Q&A. So as you think of your questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll keep track of those and have a chance to discuss a few and hopefully be able to follow up on the ones that we didn't discuss. And we will be sending a recording of this conversation to all of you so that you can share with friends and others and keep the conversation going. So turning to our panelists, I'd like to start by having you introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to RMI and a bit about your work over the last year. Habiba, can we start with you?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, speaking to you all from Abuja, Nigeria. Africa Energy Program. Prior to joining RMI, a PhD in energy systems planning. What really brought me to RMI was, and for me, energy poverty was a daily experience. So I knew whatever to be addressing the energy gap that existed on the. And my PhD was focused on understanding how to plan technologies and policies you need to transform into a low carbon economy. Like the place that was not just doing the thinking, but also doing the doing that we think are going to get us to that low carbon transformation.
Perfect collaboration or perfect background for RMI, which does the thinking and the doing. That's kind of the modus operandi for RMI. Whitney, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Martha. So hi, everyone. I'm Whitney Mann. I'm a manager on our climate finance program based in our office in Boulder, Colorado. I joined RMI in 2019, so about 4.5 years ago. And before RMI, I was working in wholesale energy procurement. So essentially that's the bulk purchase commitments by electric utilities to supply energy to homes. And through that work, I saw and learned that there are a lot of inefficiencies in the way that we produce and use energy. The biggest, of course, being climate change. And RMI was really established and designed to tackle some of those inefficiencies, and it has a really well-earned reputation for bold and innovative thinking. And that mindset and approach and mission is really what brought me here. So on my team at the Center for Climate Aligned Finance, we work with the largest commercial banks who have made commitments to be net zero by 2050. And we support them through that really daunting process of shifting the trillions from high emitting assets to low carbon portfolios. And over the past year in particular, I've been working on a program called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that came out of the US's Inflation Reduction Act. And I think I'll talk more about that program later, but it was really designed to mobilize private capital for clean energy investments in low-income places. So it's a program that's of great interest to our bank partners who have climate commitments, and it's also allowed me to work much more closely with staff across programs at RMI, which has been a fun change of pace.
Well, we will get into that for sure in a couple of minutes. And Paula, can you please introduce yourself a little bit and tell us why you joined RMI?
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm Paula Valencia, RMI's Global South Senior Associate and Philippine Country Representative. I joined RMI because I wanted to bring the expertise of different RMI professionals from the US and the Global South to the Philippines, and for me to share the experiences and best practices that we have in the Philippines to the rest of the world. Prior to RMI, I was working for a local climate and energy think tank as well as supporting energy startups. So I've been with RMI since 2001, and we've been working on different programs, including climate resilient cities, offshore wind market development research, and fossil phase-out work, among others. And the Southeast Asia team, while supporting the advancement of our respective economies, is also working on cross-country programs, as well as cross-sectoral collaboration within RMI. So I'm very honored to be here to share our work with you.
That's great. So Paula, maybe I'll stick with you since you have the mic. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Climate Resilient Cities Project and just what that means in the Philippines or elsewhere in Southeast Asia, if you want to comment on other places?
So climate resiliency is very important in countries like the Philippines and other countries that are very vulnerable to the effects of climate change, both slow onset and extreme weather events. So in the Philippines, for example, we get an average of 20 typhoons every year. And since we're one of the most vulnerable countries, I would like to say that we want to be more resilient than when we are right now. And unfortunately, that is not yet the case. So we're trying really hard to help these cities adapt more to climate change, become more resilient, be able to sustain, survive, and thrive despite the physical and economic shocks caused by the climate crisis.
So that rings a bell to me because in my work with CARE, we've set up a platform of 80 different local Filipino organizations that respond to hurricanes or typhoons and crises on a humanitarian side. But what are some of the things that you would do at a city level to make a city more resilient? Just some examples.
So to make a city more resilient, for example, at RMI, we're focusing more on energy resiliency and how energy can help these cities be more resilient. So in that case, we're helping some cities install renewable energy, distributed energy resources to make sure that they are more independent than just depending on the grid. So in case of natural disasters, they'll be able to continue, especially their social services. They can continue providing services for the people, including food security, healthcare, just overall operations and business continuity, instead of just waiting for the grid to come back up again online.
Gotcha. So it's largely been solar that's been the secret sauce.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anything else in the Philippines on the energy resiliency? Any other techniques?
So we're also working on, for example, battery energy storage, especially for small island grids in the Philippines. So not all islands in the Philippines are connected to each other. There are still small islands that are not yet connected to the main grid. So for these communities, they have their own solar panel installations, but a lot of them cannot afford it. So there are some innovative solutions that a community will be cost sharing the whole solar system, and then they will actually share and then pay little amounts of what they can afford. So instead of like paying after consuming it, they're actually prepaying it. So there's also return of investment to the developers.
Interesting. Thank you. Habiba, could I turn back to you? And I have read a little bit about the Energizing Agriculture program, and I think others would be interested in that too. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So over the last 3 years, RMI has been implementing the Energizing Agriculture program, which is essentially to use renewable energy to support agricultural businesses, particularly. The reason this program was designed to target agriculture is because a lot of at developing countries focus on energy supply, electricity. However, we saw that from the initial Nigeria, the community members in so many cases were because there was no demand in that community. A lot of their energy using either firewood or diesel or for other fossil fuels like diesel. A huge opportunity to teach them how to use clean electricity businesses, which are primarily in the agriculture sector, because most of these communities is working with a whole host of stakeholders, from community engagement, working with the solar electricity providers as well, to design the type of equipment and technology process crops, and then use solar power to support those businesses. One of the communities, Adebayo, in the south of Nigeria, which is oil palm region in Nigeria. And prior to this intervention, it took about 4 days to process that goes into, can be further processed into consumer goods, or that's used for consumption in the mini factory that we've installed, the solar powered, makes that process take 50% more oil because the equipment is way more efficient. And that's bringing more profits, a higher quality product that they can take to the market, and more profits to the community in the jobs. And then we are also creating indirect jobs by the ecosystem that we've created in that community. So the whole purpose of Energize to transform energy access into impact on livelihoods. You need to teach people how to use it to generate income and to transform.
It sounds absolutely transformational, Habiba, and I hope somebody can put into the chat the article about energizing agriculture, because I know you're unfortunately the internet isn't perfect connecting us, and so we're losing about every 8th word, Habiba. So if you have any better way to connect, and it was better when you turned your picture off. I also know from work with CARE that when crops are harvested and you have a surplus of something, to be able to dry things and save them is just a huge deal. And you can't always have the sunshine to do it because sometimes it's rainy season. These kinds of projects make a big difference in people's lives for sure. So Whitney, turning to you, and you mentioned inefficiencies and something that was really interesting you, and you also mentioned the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which if I recall was something like $27 billion worth, our largest ever clean energy fund. and I think we call it the GGRF internally, but hopefully you don't say that in your speaking. We all know it's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacts low and disadvantaged communities and how it's used and what we're doing with it? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I will try to avoid all acronyms and initialisms, is a program coming out of the US's Inflation Reduction Act. And as you said, it's the largest clean energy investment in low-income communities. So why do we need a program like that? I think we know that there are economic and health and safety benefits, right, from switching from fossil fuel appliances or vehicles, fossil fuel-driven gas vehicles, to green alternatives. For instance, households and businesses that do that have often, in many cases, lower monthly electricity or gas bills. But those are savings that accrue over the time that you own that asset. And some households and businesses have the means to make that down payment on those clean energy technologies that will pay for themselves over time, but some don't. And so for a household that's living paycheck to paycheck, or a small business who maybe doesn't have a credit history, realizing solar panels or electric appliances or buying an electric vehicle, those assets have really high upfront costs. And for many low income or historically underserved communities, getting an affordable loan to finance those assets can be tricky. So even though there are longer lifetime benefits, it's really like the barrier is realizing the financing to get them in the first place so that you can realize those benefits. So the GGRF, so Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, it's so ingrained, was really designed specifically to overcome those challenges and realize the clean energy transition at the local level for households and communities. It was designed very creatively through a few competitions and award types with distinct but reinforcing goals. And the idea of those overall is to enable really flexible and fit for purpose financing that reaches the households and borrowers, provides what they need, but also builds scale and turns ultimately that $27 billion down payment into tenfold more investment in clean energy by de-risking investments, by leveraging those funds with private debt, by recycling capital over time, and building scale through smaller investments to reach secondary markets. So it's a really transformational way to be driving the clean energy transition in communities, and a really cool and unprecedented program that we're excited to be working on.
And Whitney, how far along are we with executing this right now? Is it happening, or are we still a couple months away?
Just a couple months away. So last month, at the end of March, early April, the awardees were announced for the competition. So these are effectively the groups that will be managing the funds and deploying them through different means. And the programs are expected to start this summer.
And RMI's ongoing role in all of this. I know we helped think it up and create it and write the legislation. What are we going to be doing going forward?
Yeah, there's really a lot of ways that RMI is able to support, which is, I mentioned, I've been able to work more closely with staff across programs through this, which has been great. And ultimately, I think that the simplest or high-level way to describe it is we're a technical assistance provider to the awardees, to the groups who are ultimately deploying the funds, so community lenders, as well as some of the borrowers. So we're playing a few roles. One of them is just building on the knowledge that RMI has across our programs on sectoral energy transitions and developing that through trainings and capacity building for community lenders who have long and deep roots in communities, providing financing solutions, but many of them are newer to climate and need to get up to speed quickly. So really building on our pool of expertise and getting that out to this national network of lenders. Another way is connecting the awardees of the funds with our commercial bank partners at the Center for Climate Aligned Finance. So one of the core goals of the program is mobilizing private markets more efficiently for investment in these communities. So for instance, we're having a convening next week that brings these groups together for kind of tactical workshopping around solutions and how to mobilize private markets more efficiently. We have some thought leadership on ways or financial innovations to use this funding more effectively and in a way that really builds wealth for borrowers. So our teams are leading on some research to that end, and we have some advisory cohorts with sort of first movers who are able to pilot this, and we can learn from their experiences and iterate more quickly on finding ways to deploy this capital that makes the best use of it. We are also providing or developing, I should say, some analysis to understand the clean energy opportunity in different places. We know that different clean technologies are needed in different places. Different places have different competitive advantages or constraints. So providing some analysis on what that opportunity looks like, and also how you can think about the workforce needs to really drive economic development in a place. There are other ways too, but it's really just across the board, really leveraging the expertise that our programs have for making sure that this program can be the most effective as possible, as quickly as possible.
Right. So thanks, Whitney. You've talked a lot about scaling the work, and I just want to come back to Paula and Habiba on the subject of scaling the work. I know we've got a lot of elections going on around the world, and lots of people are concerned about our climate work kind of slowing down or losing progress. But we know that one of the ways to keep everything moving is to work locally and work on local projects. And that's kind of what we're doing around the world. But can you talk about our work driving change at the community level and what potential that work has to scale no matter what's happening politically around us? So maybe you can begin, Paula, and then we'll go to Habiba.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Martha. So in RMI Southeast Asia program, we pride ourselves on our stakeholder engagement. This is to ensure that the communities most affected by the issues we face are the ones identifying the solution that works best for them. Each community is different, and we learn from them every time we work together. Sustainable growth is how our work drives change on a community level. World leaders play an important role in determining where our species would end up 25, 50, or 100 years from now. And while we always hope that the right leaders get elected, a real job actually is to be prepared in continuing our work regardless of the result of every election. Leaders come and go, and that is why we invest more in building the capacity of the staff in the ministry level and local government offices. We empower these local champions by including them in the process from the very beginning. We do not tell them what to do, but we identify and find solutions to them by providing a platform where relevant stakeholders will be heard, facilitating healthy and constructive discussions, and making sure that what we think is something we can do and eventually scale on their own over time, even without us.
Got it. Habiba, can you talk a little bit about local empowerment and about scaling, regardless of who's in charge?
Yeah, just building on what Paula just said, I think we have a similar approach in Nigeria, where we are trying to create a self-sustaining an energy agriculture ecosystem. So a lot of focus on building local capacity of both companies that are providing services, at the same time building technical capacity within some of these rural communities to be able to operate and maintain this equipment that we are providing them. Throughout, a big focus of the Energizing Agriculture program is that we want this to be self-sustaining when RMI isn't around or when RMI is tackling the next challenge. And we've offered everything from venture support to companies that are providing equipment, designing equipment, fabricating it, to support building technician capacity in communities and in villages in Nigeria. At the same time, training solar mini-grid developers to understand how they can build partnerships with communities, with equipment providers, so that they can replicate it, so that they can replicate this at this size. Because of the energy gap in Nigeria, we know that energy supply infrastructure is going to continue to be built, but now we've taught all the stakeholders in that ecosystem how to build the right partnerships, how to build the capacity in the communities that they're going to operate. That we see a lot of what we've tested out in the field replicated. And the crux of all that we do is rural economic transformation. I think when communities and government and leadership now seeing the work that RMI has done, we are creating businesses and in places that people didn't think you could create value. in communities that typically have been forgotten. But through these agricultural value chains, we've shown that you can create, using solar energy, you can create profitable businesses, you can scale them. And now we see that private investors want to sustain the momentum that RMI has created in these communities. So like Paula said, leadership changes, but we expect that we've shown that there's a vested interest for the success of these businesses and the scaling of these businesses across the entire country. So regardless of the leadership, we've left behind companies and an ecosystem that will sustain itself.
Martha, you're on mute.
On mute.
Sorry, thank you. I was muted to try and help us hear Habiba, and that was perfect, by the way. We could hear you very well now. So I was just going to ask, what is the size of a small business versus a large business in some of these that you're creating? I'm just trying to get a sense of the scale of an individual entity at the village level.
Of course. So to put a context, these communities in terms of energy supply have mini grids that are as small as 20 kilowatts. And the largest we have in Nigeria currently is 400 kilowatt solar peak. So that's the scale of the energy demand in those communities. In terms of the size of businesses and the income level, prior to some of our interventions, we discussed, for example, in the north central of the country where we have rice milling projects, and there were businesses that were turning over about $100 a year, right? Processing rice. Typically, people own a small plot of land, so they grow their own rice, they process it, and they sell it. They keep some for their homes, and then they sell the surplus in the market. But now our largest business is doing that in about 2 days, right? Being able to create $100 in terms of revenue, because not only with the efficient equipment, and it's a female beneficiary as well, which I think is great. We've had this huge focus on gender equity and social inclusion. But with the faster, higher throughput equipment that she has, she's processing her own rice, and then everybody in the community is now paying her a service fee to use her equipment to process theirs because of the higher quality of the rice that comes out of it. And because that rice is higher quality, and what that means is just fewer grains are broken, so you can sell it for a higher price in the market. We've seen that she's had a huge demand for her own services. So she's using it to process her rice at the same time, providing that service to the rest of the community. And RMI has been hounded about facilitating more of these machines to come into the community because everybody now sees the business opportunity.
I did it again. Who is the designer of the machine, Habiba?
So working with two companies, one is called Farm Warehouse. The second is Energy Excel. So Energy Excel, some of this equipment is imported, but with Farm Warehouse, we work with a local cooperative of fabricators. Typically, the electric motor will be imported from China, but the rest of the equipment will be fabricated locally and assembled locally. What we are moving to is, because of sometimes some of the supply chain difficulties and the long lead times in getting equipment imported into the country, we're also working on building the capacity of manufacturers to design and manufacture this equipment in country.
That's great. Whitney, did you have any other comments on the subject of scaling or local empowerment to carry things on no matter what political leadership is running?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, you mentioned that I had talked a lot about scale. So I think maybe I didn't emphasize enough that one of the things that's so unique and special about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is that the way that it will deliver this financing is really through mission-driven community lenders who have been working for decades with communities to overcome challenges to accessing affordable financing. So these are the groups that I mentioned we'll be working with to get them more up to speed on what climate looks like, even though they have this really established track record of providing affordable financing to the communities where they work. So these are groups who, they're often called lenders of last resort. They're, for instance, during the pandemic, they were especially critical in keeping houses and businesses afloat. So in terms of delivering the clean energy transition, they really have that network and are really well positioned to build that bridge from small communities and small projects through standardization and bundling projects together and connecting those projects with capital markets, because it won't happen by accident. It really will require those intentional interventions. And these groups have the relationships and the know-how for providing capital in a way that works for these households and businesses. So that's been an exciting partnership to build, and an exciting avenue to continue to work with them on driving change through
Great.
their existing practices.
Thank you. Well, so the three of you, you know, you've got probably 1,000 people listening to you, and some number of them are thinking, I would like to try to bring some of these things to my community. What do I do? What advice do you have to our listeners about how they might, you know, how they might impact the energy transition in their community, and perhaps even how they might access some of the work that you're describing and bring it towards their community? You want to start, Paula?
Yeah. So for those who want to make a difference in the energy transition in their respective communities, I'd recommend to be more involved. Participate. You'd be surprised with the options available to you. We live now in a society where we can generate our own electricity without having to pay a single cent upfront. So this is also the age of social media, and it's easier to talk to one another, to fellow consumers, to those in power generation companies, and even to your elected representatives. So I encourage everyone to be more involved in the process. And if you have any questions related to the energy transition and about the roles you can play in your respective communities, we are here as RMI. We facilitate discussions between local stakeholders to find solutions that would work best for everyone. So please reach out, and we'll be more than happy to provide you with our support.
Thanks. And Habiba, how about you? And I'll mute again.
Yeah, just adding to everything Paula said, I would also say, coming from a country or place where climate is typically a second or third tier development priority, it's important to highlight the challenges and what the challenges that the consequences of climate change will bring to the community, and also the opportunity it creates. I think for us in Nigeria and more broadly in Africa, showing that it creates so much opportunity for development, for job creation, for income generation, showing that to our leaders, to our decision makers, has really turned the tide on how they respond to climate challenges. In terms of at a community level, I would also say get involved. If you have expertise in the energy field, you can join us. You know, RMI is really at the forefront of trying to tackle some of these challenges and implement them. I was a researcher before, and I just got tired of doing research, and I wanted to implement the work that I was doing, and I joined RMI, and I'm doing it every day. I have been for 3 years now. So if you find yourself in that position, I hugely recommend it. It's a decision that I will never regret.
Inspirational. And Whitney?
Yeah, I love Habiba's and Paula's answers. I would add that I think, so we talk at RMI about the clean energy transition, and it really feels like we're in the midst of a transition, and that takes time, and that often means that there's a knowledge gap and things are catching up. So especially through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and all our work, we see that the green technologies are there, the incentives are there that make them competitive, but sometimes there's a knowledge gap, and they're not always the most prevalent option, and that means that sometimes it could take some proactive steps on the consumer side to reach them, even if they are there and they're more affordable. If your furnace breaks, it may not be the option that your contractor recommends an electric one, since we're sort of catching up to the opportunity. So I think that being proactive, recognizing that the options are there, but they're not always prevalent, can help us take the first steps towards making them more of the status quo.
Got to work a little harder to find those options. So now we get to turn to the audience questions, and there are lots of them. The first one we wanted to take up is for you, Whitney, from Sandra McCardle. Are energy investments included in the greenhouse, are energy efficiency investments included in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund?
Yeah, great question. So yes, I mentioned earlier that the fund is divided into 3 competitions. So one of those is called Solar for All, And that competition is specifically for investment in rooftop solar and enabling upgrades. So I think energy efficiency can be included in there, but it's a smaller scope of projects. The other two competitions have 3 priority project sectors: net zero buildings, zero emissions transportation, and distributed generation and storage. So in the net zero buildings category, energy efficiency and building retrofits are absolutely included and are shaping up to be one of the biggest investment priorities across the awardees.
Great. Paula, this one's for you. Can you talk more about how battery storage is being used in the Philippines? Maybe where does the batteries come from, and who knows how to manage them and that sort of thing.
So batteries in the Philippines come in different sizes and forms. We have the more advanced ones, bigger ones that are being used on as ancillary services. So this means that this is the backup of our grid itself. And then we also have the smaller ones that are used by, like I mentioned earlier, those in small isolated grids that are not connected to the grid, so they need to store their own electricity. Some of them even use car batteries. They use it to store energy, and it's not even the more advanced ones or the lithium ion ones that are being produced in the market. So people are getting more creative with how they access battery. And then we also have those that has access to the market, installing solar panels in their residences, even if they're connected to the grid, and also installing batteries just as a backup in case of emergency. So again, these all come in different sizes and forms, and we also get it from different resources or manufacturers across the world.
All over. So I know from my own involvement in the trucking industry that as we have more and more electric vehicles, they will have a relatively short life in vehicles, because once they degrade a little bit in commercial application, people can't keep them and they have to swap them out. And so there will be a big flow, let's say 3 years after we have a lot of electric trucks and buses out there, that a big flow of used batteries that will go into stationary power, I would imagine. And so that's kind of part of our future here. And one for you, Habiba. What is the primary source of energy for the agricultural program, and what is the cost of energy?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of maybe starting with the cost of energy, mini grid electricity tariffs for there's about 120 mini grids in Nigeria now, and they range anywhere from 200 to 300 naira a kilowatt hour. To put that in dollar terms, let me just do the conversion quickly. It's about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. A dollar is about 1,500 naira now. So that's about the price of the electricity. It's much higher than the price of the grid, of course, but the price of the grid is for a very unreliable service. You probably get an average of 4 hours of grid electricity in Nigeria, whereas a lot of these mini grids get 20 plus hours of electricity service in a rural, remote, and off-grid community. In terms of the main source of energy, almost all mini grids are solar powered in Nigeria. They have a battery complemented with the battery storage, and in a few of them you have a diesel component as well, just as a backup in case there's a failure of the grid, or in especially high peak hours, but never to run more than 2-3 hours in a given day. We have a couple of EAP Energizing Agriculture program partners that are now looking to actually phase out diesel and bring in biomass, because we're also getting a lot of agricultural waste from the businesses, and we're trying to integrate that into the energy source so that we can actually move away from fossil fuels entirely.
Can you tell us a little bit about the plans to move some of this innovation beyond Nigeria to other countries in Africa, and how far along you are?
Yeah, so we are actually in the middle of designing a new program that's looking to, we call it Energizing Agriculture 2.0, but based on the results that we've had in Nigeria, I want to check that I'm coming through. It seems to have frozen for a second. Awesome. So based on the progress that we've made in the last 3 years, we've been approached by different countries to replicate what we've done in Nigeria, in other countries, Sierra Leone, Congo, Ethiopia, where RMI already has active projects and was the first country for the Africa program. However, we are just going through this phase where we are trying to identify which country has the elements that enabled us to succeed in Nigeria, which is is Africa's most advanced mini-grid market, identifying the country that has those conditions that we can go in and replicate some of the successes of energizing agriculture. At the same time, in scale, we aren't stopping in Nigeria. We targeted 200 sites in 3 years. We're now going for 1,000 in the next 3 years, and to just keep scaling this work to ensure that we want to see every mini-grid being paired with a sustainable rural economic transformation solutions centered around agriculture, because a big part of the country's development plan is agriculture, is to really upgrade agricultural value chains in the country. So we are really, we're leaning in, and RMI is playing a big part in realizing that vision for the country.
That will be transformational for the lives of people, for sure. Having seen many villages around Africa without electricity and no plans for the central grid to ever get there. So this is very exciting. Question for Whitney this time. How is RMI partnering with large commercial banks on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund?
Yeah, so our bank partners through the Center for Climate Aligned Finance that I mentioned earlier. So these are institutions that have set commitments to be net zero by 2050, and the Center for Climate Aligned Finance exists to help them through that massive challenge of setting the right targets that send the right signals to their bankers about where investment opportunities exist, and then also holds them accountable through the right metrics that can be comparable and shows progress over time. There is a real challenge in implementing those changes, and the reality is that these banks also have really specific capital allocation drivers. They're looking for deals that are a certain size, that meet certain risk and return requirements, and that's a regulated requirement that they have. And so when it comes to thinking about how to start deploying capital and shifting their portfolios in line with a climate-aligned future, programs like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund present a huge opportunity to help accelerate the bankability of climate-aligned projects, especially in low-income communities where there are additional challenges to providing affordable financing historically. So by providing this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is concessional capital, it can de-risk these investments, it can help cover some of the transaction costs to bundle similar projects together and help create that bridge to capital markets. And so we're working with our bank partners by pulling them into the conversation really and helping facilitate solutions that will work for communities, as well as actually meet the capital allocation drivers that private capital providers have. So we're sort of just hoping to create that bridge and bring them into the conversation for more practical and impactful financing opportunities.
So are the metrics that you refer to internal metrics that their board of directors just decide this is the right thing for us to do, we want to achieve, we want to put this much money to work in the sector?
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of their commitments are available on their websites. You can see what they've committed to. It's usually sort of sector by sector. So in the power sector, in the building sector, in many of the hard to abate sectors like steel or aviation. More broadly, there are also like different platforms and voluntary alignment frameworks to help guide what those metrics should be. And I mentioned like the comparability piece. So wanting to be sure that one institution's progress on net zero can be compared to another's net progress on net zero, so you can see what that looks like and really hold everyone accountable. So it is institution by institution, motivated by seeing the opportunity in the climate transition and also the real risks of not shifting your dollars or getting started on shifting your dollars if we know that the economy is transitioning to net zero, but your portfolio is rooted in fossil fuels, then that faces a real risk to those businesses and clients that you're banking with.
I'll just throw in a comment to support one of the industries that I've worked in a long time is aluminum. And we really appreciate RMI's effort to develop a rubric so that we could all calculate the same way the energy content of a finished product. And we all had different ways of doing it, and we didn't connect. And without a common measurement system for an industry, it's really hard to drive progress forward. And it took RMI and their experts bringing together industry participants with a kind of a steady, calm eye on the subject to really make that happen. And it is valuable to the industry. So thank you for that. So a question for both Paula and Habiba has come in, which is about the barriers to your work. And really, if you can comment on technical, economic, operational, social barriers to building out the clean energy system in the global South. What have you seen? What are you worried about? You want to go first, Paula? You're nodding. It sounds like you thought about this a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of barriers actually. I can start with the socioeconomic one. Since renewable energy is coming mostly from recommendations from the global North, and these are recommendations to the global South, some get a bit defensive that these are recommendations from economies that have already exhausted their or spent their greenhouse gas emissions to economies that are just booming in the past decades. So, but we're also seeing like commitments, for example, in financing from global North countries. So that works out sometimes, but there are also issues on policy. For example, some countries do not have the policies that would support more renewable energy in the system. In the case of the Philippines, we have really good policies, but the thing is, our grid is not yet ready to support it. So there's a lot of support from policy side, from financing side, but then the grid is not yet ready to absorb more variable RE in the system. That's why it's it's harder for us to implement more. Like, for example, our net metering could only accommodate up to 100 kilowatt peak of solar panels. And then after that, you're no longer allowed for net metering. There's also more interest, for example, in offshore wind potential. But the thing is, like, there's for offshore wind and other wind technologies, economies of scale make more sense. But if you're going for economies of scale and there's no points of interconnection, that's also an issue. Another issue would be investment in infrastructure that would support building this technology. So there's a lot of things that needs to be done. There's a lot of challenges. But I think the silver lining is there's also a lot of support coming in from different countries, different commitments through mechanisms like the Green Climate Fund or commitments through the Paris Agreement. So that's a good thing. So I think we're just trying to catch up with all of these things happening at the same time, making sure that we achieve or we reach the targets that we've committed for 2050.
So it sounds like it's more of a resource question. That would be number one, just financial resources, fund everything at once, not a technical barrier. Or there's no invention that needs to be made. It's more how about the training of the people to implement it? Is that a barrier as well? Or have you got
I guess this is just based on experience, but I think for renewable energy, it's easier to train people, especially those that are coming from the fossil technologies shifting to renewable energy. They have a lot of interest already. They know how electricity works, and they're willing to be retrained. Countries like, for example, here, us in the Philippines, we have a lot of overseas Filipino workers working already in different countries, in different renewable energy sites. So just to have them back in the Philippines would be really great, but we just really need to have that, like, okay, where are we going to build the next big RE site?
Got it. Got it. Well, I wish we had net metering where I live in Georgia. Um, our policies are a little bit behind yours. Habiba, what about you? What barriers are you seeing?
Yeah, I could give an overview. There are many challenges, as is with creating an industry in a challenging economic environment like in Nigeria, but maybe highlighting some of the ones that are very unique to the Nigeria or to the Africa context. In many of these communities, there isn't a history of using electricity. That solar mini grid is the first time they've had energy access to electricity. So there is this reluctance to abandon traditional ways of let's say, agricultural processing. There is a huge community engagement and retraining process that we have to go through to show them the benefits of mechanizing existing processes, switching from firewood to electricity to an alternative, because there is just that inherent resistance to change and disruption in these communities. That's something we've tried to tackle by just extensive community engagement and allowing the time for change to take place in these communities. A second one is in terms of some of the techno-economic challenges. Because the electricity demand is so low, initially when you build out this infrastructure is so underutilized, and it's hard to create an incentive for private capital to go where there really isn't a demand. And that's why Energizing Agriculture was structured entirely around what we call the productive use of electricity. Until a kilowatt hour can become dollars for people, they don't see the value in using that electricity. Before Energizing Agriculture, there have been mini grids in Nigeria since 2017, but in many of these communities, you find people disconnecting themselves even. But when we show that, look, this connection to your house can be used to power a chest freezer, or a cold room that preserves your food for longer, or you can mill your rice and earn more money in the market, the kilowatt hour transforms their own livelihoods. And that's been what has been missing in the ecosystem. A lot of focus on supply and no demand stimulation solutions. And RMI has sort of shown that you need to work on supply and demand challenges in tandem to be able to realize the opportunity in those communities. Maybe the final thing I'll touch on is working somewhere where there's so low incomes. 20 cents a kilowatt hour may sound not that much, but it's where you earn $20 a month, it's huge. And where there are very few members of the community that actually have occupations and actually are earning through some form of economic activity, it's so critical that you show that that kilowatt hour translates not just into more money for businesses, but it frees up time. It means that kids can get educated so that they don't have to be gathering firewood at 4 a.m. in the morning, as we saw in one of the communities that we work in. These are challenges that we've gradually now, across about 200 sites now, we're showing people that this change can happen in the span of 3 years. So we hope that, we can just accelerate that going forward.
Fantastic. We are drawing to a close. If any of the three of you have anything that you really wish you'd said that we didn't draw out, just wave your hand. Otherwise, I'll bring us to a close if that's okay. I could listen to all three of you for days, and hopefully we'll have the chance to do so again very soon. For the audience, thank you so much for your questions. There were many, many insightful questions. We really appreciate everybody's time, for sure. And we were able to do what we do and hire people like this because of people like you. As a nonprofit, RMI generates the vast majority of its revenue from philanthropy. And today we have a special challenge in place, as you see from the slide. For the next 48 hours, all the donations will be tripled up to $250,000, thanks to our challenge donors. And there is the website where you can go, info.rmi.org/donate, or you can scan the QR code. Again, I thank you very much for joining. I hope you learned something. I sure did. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. And hopefully you had a chance to copy some of the links that were put up in the chat, because there were a lot of good material there. I just thank Paula, Whitney, Habiba. You three were fantastic. I'm proud to be part of your team. So keep up the great work, and thanks for the education and sharing all the exciting work you're doing around the world. It's making a difference. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.